welcome back to the Unqualified for Space podcast with me, Michael Hodges. And today I have as my guest Miss Danielle Fouty. She currently lives in Los Angeles, California, and is in marketing. So Danielle, welcome to the show. How are you doing tonight?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on. Just so you're aware, you're my first female guest on the show.
Yes, cool. Success.
Yes. I definitely would like to have the perspective of, both sexes. So I think it's important to not just have a one side or the other when it comes to space and science and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, and from what I've been seeing on Twitter, there's so many women who are interested in space and who work in space. So I think there's definitely like a huge market out there for you, for you to have on your podcast.
So Danielle, I like to start off every episode of this podcast with what I feel is an important question is, why is space important to you?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think as you go through life, you experience space in a variety of different ways. Like you learn the planets when you're in like elementary school, things like that. I guess space wasn't really on my radar as like an everyday type of thought until about a little over a year ago,
Okay.
when my friend, he works at SpaceX, and I had no idea what SpaceX was or what they did or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And he was saying that, of talking about like rockets and things like that. And I was like, okay, that's awesome. And then he said that SpaceX's goal was to get humans to Mars.
Mm-hmm.
And I was completely shocked by that. I had no idea that anyone was even thinking about that, and that there's like a company out there that wants to bring humanity to a different planet.
Mm-hmm.
So that night I did like a bunch of research about SpaceX, and then kind of like space in general.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what that conversation is what got me excited about what Elon is doing, not just like with SpaceX, but with Tesla and with all his other ventures, the Boring Company and Neuralink and things like that. So I started following Elon on Twitter after that. And then through following him, I've followed a bunch of other amazing people that are interested, like who are interested in space and technology. And I've learned so much about space based off of like the things Elon posts or what he likes on Twitter and what everyone else posts. And then all the different podcasts that I now listen to. So now space has become more prevalent in my life, especially since like I watched all the SpaceX launches and things like that. So it's very exciting. But I think before I was interested in Elon and SpaceX and things like that, I thought about space more in a like an alien type of way. I was always like curious about aliens and like why we haven't seen any aliens, if the universe is so vast. And yeah, so that's kind of like what space means to me, I guess.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get started in space or start thinking about space for different reasons. For me, it was just ever since I was a kid, I've been basically just fascinated by it, anything and everything regarding science in general, but more specifically space, I guess. But I got to see a shuttle launch as a kid. Growing up in Florida, it's relatively easy to see a launch on any given day. From, you could almost be in Miami and still see it to an extent, of launches. So, being here, it kind of gives you an advantage as to kind of like forcing you more into that world, because the Cape Canaveral and all that's so heavily focused on space, obviously.
So
But
you're
as
more interested in like how humans interact with space and what.
yeah, well, pretty much like anything space. Like I've delved deep into like reading about black holes. I've studied like physics as much as my comprehension can understand of physics. And anyone watching this, like I've said in previous episodes, I am not a scientist, so don't take what I'm saying as the gospel. But um, I've probably read almost every book that any astrophysicist has put out. So I definitely love everything about space, and I feel like it gives people a perspective on their own lives that it wouldn't if you didn't study it otherwise.
That's so true. Yes, exactly. And I've also been interested in physics based off of my like space ventures, I guess. So I've been like listening to Sean Carroll, his
Mm-hmm.
podcast, and then I also like listen to his book about quantum mechanics and multiple worlds theories, things like that. So it's all very interesting.
Yes, people kind of like him that kind of inspired me to start this podcast because they break space down into ways that anyone can understand. So that's kind of why I'm doing this at the same time.
Oh, amazing. So you also have seen his or listened to his podcast.
Yep. I've listened to his like talks on, online that he's given, interviews, all types of stuff.
Yeah, I like how him and I guess you too, you guys both yeah, like make things understandable to
Mm-hmm.
the everyday person.
And I don't, I generally try and say like an average person level, and I don't try and like insult people's intelligence by saying that. But most things, when you actually think about space, it's very scientifically, mathematically, regulated. So I don't, like I said, I don't claim to be a genius in any perspective whatsoever. But some of these things you really have to like break it down mathematically in order to understand it. So
Right.
yeah. Anyone who, when I'm saying average, I'm not trying to diminish people's intelligence level. But I figured you mentioned a few different things when asking about what interests you about space. And I pretty much, the only reason I even started on the Twitter platform was to follow SpaceX, ULA, and NASA updates. It's like the only reason I started. For about a year, I didn't post anything. I was just getting updates from Elon and other people like Tori Bruno, Rocket Lab out of New Zealand, Peter Beck. So being on that, do you feel like social media platforms have enabled a whole group of people that never would have cared about space to learn about it?
Definitely. I think so. When I first started following Elon, I didn't know like what to expect or anything
Mm-hmm.
like that. But since then, he posts and likes things on Twitter, if that makes sense to people who don't use Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
You can see what Elon likes on Twitter, and it's all like science stuff, and the the accounts that post those science things
Mm-hmm.
um, make it fascinating. So they'll post like either this amazing picture of stars and like of a galaxy or something, and then that is like so visually appealing that I'll
Mm-hmm.
click on it and then I'll like read about what um, telescope took that picture. Um, and so I think social media has done it's encouraging everyone else to post more about space, and NASA does a great job about sharing things. SpaceX does a great job about broadcasting their launches
Mm-hmm.
as well. So social media has been great, I think, for space.
Yeah, I think it's definitely opened up a whole new, side to people to maybe want to go research things on their own because they'll see it on there. And obviously, it's a very small amount of information you can share on a post on that platform, but it enables people obviously to go, oh, what's this they're talking about? Then they go search and then leads you down that rabbit hole of spending 4 hours researching black holes. That,
Yes,
you
it's
know,
the rabbit holes. I totally agree. I've been down a bunch of different rabbit holes, and those rabbit holes I mean, I'm not an expert in any of the rabbit holes that I've gone down, but at
Hmm.
least it gave my brain something to think about.
Yeah, and there's like you said, there's a lot of people doing a lot of great stuff when it comes to science, and like most astrophysicists like Neil, Sean, Brian Cox is another great one that shares a lot of really awesome information on there. But I think government organizations like NASA, they share a lot of the research that they've done over, since their inception many, many years ago. And then companies like Rocket Lab and SpaceX do really great cinematography when it comes to launches. So it lets people see all these different aspects I think are important.
Yes, I agree. And um, yes, that's very important.
But on the flip side of that, like anything in social media, you have people out there who think that they know everything, and therefore, spout out everything they think they know, whether it's true or not. And you have
There's
people who,
definitely a negative
yeah.
side to social media. Um, but I think that that just shows how um, diverse the world's population
Hmm.
is about and how they think about space, and if they think things are faked or staged or
Yeah.
whatever they think. It just shows you how all the different perspectives and all the different like thought patterns and like how much work we still need to do, maybe as like a um, space Twitter community
Hmm.
on educating people and getting getting people like interested. So
Because there's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which I think we have probably discussed in the past here, is that the more that you think you know, the more you'll be adamant that you're going to fight with that set of parameters, right? And the more you know, the less you actually think that you know, because you're open to the possibility that you don't know nearly as much as you think you do. So
oh
do you have
yeah,
any
so
kind of
this
like
is
a thought
interesting
on that?
because
Yeah.
yeah, I love one of my favorite like rabbit holes in my own brain to go down is thinking about how much I don't know
Hmm.
about anything. So like I start off, or like I can start off small and think like I don't know what someone else is thinking right now, but then I also don't know the experience of every single human that's been alive, or every single, I don't know the experience of an insect or things like that. So there's, and then bringing it back to space, like when I look at space, I think about like how much time, like in this like infinite amount of time that we have,
Hmm.
um, has gone on, and like how many things, how many planets have been made and destroyed, and possible like civilizations through the infinite vast amount of time and space that is out there, and how many things that like we just don't know and we could never know. And I love going down that. So I'm definitely one with the thought that I don't know so much, and I love thinking about that.
I think like I said before, I definitely don't know nearly probably like 1% as much as some of the people we've discussed thus far on the podcast. But I like to think I know like a little bit, but in that I'm completely open to the fact that the stuff I do understand, I probably don't understand. So I try and follow that philosophy of, as much as I think I might know something, if I like write something out and then somebody's like, well, actually no, because of this, like I'm not going to be like, okay, like you're an idiot because you wrote, no, like I try and operate under the fact that if someone knows more than me, they know more than me, and I'm not going to try and like fight them online about it. So you see a lot of people online, especially when it comes to space stuff, going down these tangents of, arguing with people about facts in one circumstance or another regarding all the variations of theories that there are about space. Do you think it's important to rebut some of these things, or do you think it's just a waste of time that people shouldn't worry about it?
Yeah, so I've seen this happen on my own Twitter account multiple times where someone will say something that's wrong, or they have like the wrong idea of what I'm trying to say. Um, and I think when it's something simple, like if it's a simple thing to rebut,
Hmm.
and they're um, they're not too far gone off the subject. Like if we're talking about the moon and they think the moon doesn't exist or something,
Hmm.
I mean, there's nothing you can really do there. But um, if if they're just like slightly, they just have like the wrong idea, and then you know on Twitter you can only post a certain like a limit. I guess you can do a thread, but
Hmm.
um, just trying to like better explain your idea so that you're more clear. Sometimes it's helpful, but a lot of times some people are way off the beaten trail, and at that point it's just let them comment, and you know
But
that's
I,
that.
yeah, I see a lot of like the really smart individuals. They're kind of just like back and forthing with people, or they never interact. It's kind of one way or another. But yeah, I've had even my own instances where I've written something and then someone say, "Well, based on this and blah blah blah," like you said, like the moon isn't real or space is fake, or like whatever all these things are. Like I've said in the past few episodes of this podcast, I really try hard not to negate someone's like point of view. If it helps them get through the day, then whatever. But there's certain things I just can't kind of like abide by in my own beliefs regarding space and things. So I think it's something we all struggle with, though. We all want to say, well, what I know is this, and you should know the same thing. But I guess that's probably never going to be the case.
Yeah, I think it's important to like interact with people and like spark that dialogue, and I think that's what social media is all about. But I think that people can also be kind. So whenever someone is like being rude, I think meeting that with kindness
Hmm.
would help. Especially, it would help your point too, instead of them getting angry at you for having an angry response or something. They would at least like the kindness would at least diffuse the situation and maybe like have them look at your idea
Hmm.
uh, more than if they were angry at you. They wouldn't really look at your idea in a positive light.
One thing
um,
I do find kind of comical in regards to what you're just speaking about is that, like we were just saying about the whole Dunning-Kruger effect, is that you find that I'm probably going to be hit by people by saying this, but the more educated you are on these topics, the more civil you basically become about, discussing these topics, and the less you know, but the more you think you do, which is the Dunning-Kruger effect,
mm,
the more kind of violent and abhorrent you kind of become based on that stuff. Do you have like a thought on that as well?
yeah, I actually have realized that, which is it's pretty interesting. Like they people who don't know a lot like become angry
Hmm.
for some reason, or like stand by their points like very wholeheartedly, and I don't really understand that. But it's definitely, and then people who are very like knowledgeable, they'll just be like, okay, fine.
It's an interesting aspect of like the human, psychology and how we interact with. Yeah, I find it interesting how like the human psychology works, that it's it's almost just like an embarrassment thing, I guess, especially on a social media presence where anybody can find anything you've ever written. Even if you've deleted something, it's still out there on the internet. Someone can find it, and if they say one thing wrong and someone rebuts them with a scientific fact that doesn't follow their philosophy, it just blows up basically. So I do find that interesting, that how humans operate.
Yeah. Also, like kind of on a different but related point, is I've definitely posted something that's been wrong before.
I think we all
I
have,
think,
yeah.
yeah, and I think it's um, good to just like acknowledge, like, hey, I was wrong, like I messed up,
Hmm.
not a big deal. And acknowledging that instead of kind of like defending your point, or I don't know, like being I can't think of the word right now. Defensive, I guess.
Hmm.
Just acknowledging that like nobody's ever gonna be perfect, unless like you've been studying this stuff like hardcore for like years and years, or I don't know. So
Mhm.
people just like acknowledging their mistakes and then being accepting, like, people have been accepting of my mistakes too, which has been really nice.
Yeah. Definitely always good to have a positive feedback loop, right? Instead of just a complete negative.
Right. And just again bringing it back to kindness, just like being kind to everyone, and um in their mistakes as well, because
Mhm.
I'm sure you'll make a mistake too, and people should be kind when anyone makes a mistake.
So since we're kind of been discussing like educators and the science and space, community, do you feel like a person who just shares multiple avenues regarding science or space is in line or even maybe more important than someone who's just like spent their whole life studying and only works in that job? Do you think there's like a parallel between that? Do you think one's kind of more important than the other?
That's an interesting concept because um, I think that a lot of, I guess, through listening to like Sean Carroll's podcast, he was saying that there was a lot of scientists who don't kind of like delve into other fields,
Hmm.
like what what they're studying means to philosophy or other fields in general. They just kind of like stick to like what it means to their field.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it's important to, especially like if you're an expert on something, um, bringing it to other fields and bringing it to, regardless if it's on social media or not,
Hmm.
they could probably like, I don't know if they're at a college or something, like talk to other people in those different fields about what they're studying, and just having those dialogues could open a lot of different lines of communication. I imagine that there's at least some missing knowledge out there because of these lack of conversations, like between um, uh, like masters of their fields, right?
Hmm.
So if like there was a conference of just like everyone who was super amazing in their specific field, and they all got together and talked, I'm sure that would spark like even more knowledge than them everyone keeping separately. But not everyone is made for social media or things like that.
Hmm.
So maybe like even just conversations is amazing to have, so that we can, the broader public can know more.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I've kind of alluded to it on whether I'm just like posting or in this podcast or what have you, is that I've said that like the Falcon Heavy launch in 2018 was I took my kids to go see that launch, and like I've said before, and it was an amazing experience, because I got to see when I was a kid. And prior to that, I mean, you had people, the hardcore fans who care about space and who have been watching since, they've been able to watch stuff about space. But I think that launch in particular ignited like a whole new level of interest in regards to space. And while I've said like I completely give it up and I follow every single person who's doing any type of space related activity, I think there's something to be said about the company of SpaceX and how they've been able to kind of like kickstart that imagination of what could be when it comes to space travel.
Right, and you're talking about the one where they shot up a Tesla with
Yep.
Starman.
Hmm.
Yes, very iconic. I don't know where I was. I must have been living under a rock, because that, I had no idea that that happened until after
Hey, we
until
get to relive it through their live stream though, so it's okay.
right. Thank goodness for technology.
Hmm.
But it's one of my like biggest, not my biggest, but like one of my biggest regrets, honestly, is like
Hmm.
not being aware of Elon or SpaceX during that time, because it's amazing even watching like the historic launches now, but
Hmm.
that one is just, I mean, it's my favorite one. It's my
Yeah.
favorite launch, and I'm just very sad that I wasn't there live with everyone, like cheering everyone on. And even after that, like I just it wasn't part of my world. You know, it's
Mhm.
funny because whenever I talked to people like in the SpaceX Tesla community, I asked them like, oh, like how many people do you like think know about Elon? And I think everyone just like assumes in this community that like everyone knows who Elon is,
Yeah.
but and what he does, but I think the vast majority of the population has no idea, or like has a very general thing, like one, maybe like one idea about him, and it might be a bad idea about Elon.
I'd
So
probably ar
I
I'd
they just
probably argue that most of it's probably bad just from whatever the media has portrayed, regarding that. So it's probably
right.
only
So I
the
think
hardcore people who know the good, and most people probably just, if they've even heard of them, probably know the bad.
right, yeah. So I think that's an interesting concept as well. Like how many people don't know anything about what I mean, just again, like a little over a year ago, I found out that like SpaceX was aiming to go to Mars. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't, and I think that a lot of people my age too, like still have no idea about that,
Yeah.
which is so fascinating to me. And then I think about like how many things do I not know about? Again, going back to that concept of like how many things I don't know, but um, just in a more like general sense, things that like I can know. How many things am I missing out on? So I think it's helpful to be like plugged in on Twitter, because at least I find out more things that I'm interested in and that are interesting that's happening in the world, as opposed to before when I wasn't on Twitter, or I don't know what I was doing. Like I don't
I'd
know
venture to
where.
say that, I mean, I could be very wrong here, but I'd venture to say that probably the majority of the country, if you pulled the entire, what is it, 350 million people that live here in the US, um, probably 90% of them either don't care or have never even saw seen anything regarding to space. I mean, I could be completely wrong. It could be more like 50%, but like, do you feel like that's probably true? Do you feel like it's way off?
I mean, anything regarding space, yeah. I think um so I consider myself pretty educated. I went to private school my whole life, and
Mhm.
and a lot of people in America aren't as well educated as I am, and I still don't know so many things. So I just assume that like a lot of other people, unless they've taken like a specific interest in science from a young age or
Mhm.
something like that. I wasn't interested in science, unfortunately, when I was young. But unless they've taken that special interest, I don't think it's like on people's minds. And I live in Los Angeles. I'm not just like on a farm out in the middle of nowhere. And I still had like no idea before this. So yeah, I would say 90-80%. I didn't know that I didn't know why SpaceX would make rockets. I was like, why make rockets? I had no idea what I didn't know anything about like satellites and what was in space. So
Yeah, so since you just brought that up, um, before, SpaceX and some other companies have done it along the same lines as SpaceX, but they just haven't been able to bring it to market, if I want to call it that term. Um, they've tried to make rockets and failed. They've tried to make spacecraft and failed. So based on that, like we are just alluding to, do you think like us going to Mars or us exploring the deep recesses of space, do you think that's something that everyone should be caring about? Or do you think it's something that only the people really interested in it should care?
oh, interesting. The question of if we should care about something or not. Um, it depends if you care about consciousness and humanity as a whole. and
Mm-hmm.
like where we are in space and time right now, because it's like this crazy window of opportunity that we have to explore other planets. Um, should we care? I think that's interesting. I think a lot of people have hard lives. I'm I mostly just think about America, but
Mm-hmm.
when I think about people who have hard lives, like people in Africa or like third world countries, I don't know if that's a proper term for that, but uh, I think that they have other things to care about,
Mm-hmm.
and that we're privileged in, and I feel privileged to care about humans going to Mars, because a lot of other people have like way greater worries and caring about like living day to day. But I think if anyone found out that we're going to somewhere in the stars, like somewhere, like if you look up at um, the sky, we're going somewhere out there for humans to live. I think anyone that would touch anyone, and just as like a miracle. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, like you said, there's tons of people who have, minute by minute, if not day by day, that they have to worry about just living and getting food, right? So that's, should be the foremost, thought in their mind. But like when I think about my kids, my eldest, she's 10 at the time. So by the time she's 20 or 25, it could be that, people on Mars is a normal thing, which, when my parents were little, the moon landings were happening and they thought we had already done this a long time ago. So we're kind of at that technological, like you said, window where things could be advancing exponentially and it'd be a completely different world 20 years from now than it is, right now.
Yes, and I think it's crazy to think that humans on Mars will be normalized at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy and inspiring about the future.
Yeah, definitely. That's going to be an amazing sight to hopefully in about 4 years, if they can make the, you know, internal estimates for the launch windows, that we can actually make that happen. That would be I think that would change a lot of people's thoughts on many different things, because no matter what you really believe, I mean, at some point in time, humans are going to go extinct. It's just inevitable. We're not going to live forever. We're not going to be around here for 3 billion years, most likely. The sun will destroy us anyways at that point, but that's a different story. Um, so I think that, like we've been talking about, I think caring about, you know, traveling to other planets for the sake of getting there and exploration, and also the added benefit of not going extinct is helpful. But
Right. I think just on the point of normalizing things in
mhm,
space, Elon had recently liked a post that said some guy, I don't know his name, but some made the realization that like our sun could be similar to the stars that we see.
mhm,
And to me, that was mind blowing, because like, you grow up knowing that the sun is a star,
mhm,
um, and not, it's just like closer to us.
yeah,
Um, so the fact that people didn't think about that, it's fascinating to me, like what has become normalized
yeah,
and what still will become normalized in the future. Um, is fascinating to me because they didn't know that the sun was a star. Like,
yeah. Well, they also thought the Earth was the center of the universe, and all those other things too, which is, relatively speaking, in universal time terms, we've been around for absolutely nothing, basically, in comparison to the age of the universe. So, I mean,
right.
1500s, they thought the Earth was the center of everything, and now we have people debating whether the Earth is round. But
Right. But
but
it
yeah.
that's telling on how far we, or maybe we're probably wrong on certain things too, like that we just haven't found out yet.
Oh yeah, sure. There's plenty of things like dark matter and dark energy. Dark energy is like 67% of the universe, but we've never actually like detected it. So there's all types of stuff that we probably have no idea really, but we just have the best guess currently.
Right. And knowing that there's a future where like scientists and people are working on figuring out more about our universe, and me maybe like in even in 10 years like knowing so much more about like what they've found out is like such a hopeful future for me. So we just like will learn so much more about space and our own universe. So it's an exciting thing to do, to know that we're gonna like continue learning.
Yeah, and knowledge is power, as they always say, right? So it's definitely an important thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we were kind of speaking about this before the podcast, and I'd like to ask you that if you had the opportunity while we're talking about, being an astronaut and traveling to other places, would you do it?
I I would not be an astronaut, because currently we're on California is on like a lockdown where we like kind of can't leave. I mean, we can leave our homes, but we've kind of just been like in our homes just to stay safe
Mm-hmm.
from the coronavirus. And um, so it's kind of given me like a different perspective about being alone and being kind of like, I think when you're an astronaut, I mean, you might have like a couple other people there with you, but not being able to do the everyday things that like you build your life around here on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like for me right now, I don't go into work, I don't go out to eat, I don't visit friends or family. It's just I think being an astronaut would be a special type of isolating. But what would interest me is like space tourism, I
Mm-hmm.
guess, where if they take like a rocket just like up to a certain level of the atmosphere and then you come back down type of thing. So like where you see the Earth from that point of view of being very high up in space. Um, Such a technical term.
Yep.
I think that would be interesting. And I would definitely do that. And I would trust SpaceX with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, no other rocket companies.
Throwing the
but
shade down. Yep.
but yeah, I would definitely do space tourism if I had a million. I don't know how much it costs, but if I had the money, I would definitely do that because I think it would just, it would be one of the best moments of my life, just like looking
Mm-hmm.
at the world from that point of view. That's actually why I have a map up in my room, so I can have like a more global perspective instead of just being so introspective of like what's going on in my life. I like to have things that remind me that there's a whole big world out there
Mm-hmm.
that's living and breathing and that we're all connected. And so seeing Earth from that point of view would just be mind changing, I think, life changing.
Yeah, I've watched like I don't know if you've seen Scott Kelly's Year in Space documentary. I think it's on Netflix now. And
I have not. Now I need to watch this.
yeah, it's like an 8-part kind of like mini series thing about he spent a year in space at the International Space Station. And like most astronauts have said, when they get up there, it it pretty much changes their entire view on humanity and how people should be working together and things. So from my perspective, I like if NASA or anybody called me, it's like, hey, we can send you to space right now. I'll be here in 3 hours. I'd be like running out the door to go do it. But I kind of
See, that's
believe.
so interesting because for me, like I don't have a family. It's just me and my cats, I guess. But you're like you have a family of kids and things like that. So I think that's like a different perspective
Yeah,
that
I've
you
always I was in the military for 6 years, and
okay.
I did a few deployments overseas and things. But I've always kind of, and my dad was, he was in the military, but he didn't deploy. But I've always kind of lived the life of, especially like ever having kids, is that they're looking to you to see what should be done, right? As any kid does to a parent. And you should therefore, especially like in the military, as a term like lead by example. So if you're an officer, you're like the first one to do something and everybody follows, or if you're a good officer, I guess I should say. Um, so I feel like something like that would, as much as it would, the danger and the possibility of dying and not coming back and all that, I feel like it would be an inspiring thing to them to say, oh, my dad did this, or my parent did this, or whoever you are to them. So I don't know, that's kind of me, but I've always also been an adrenaline junkie, so there's probably a little bit of stupidity with that. But
I have no one to inspire. My cats will not ever know where I went.
who knows with
But that's an
advances in
interesting perspective,
technology.
though, because you take it in the route of like inspiring, and it is going to space is very inspiring.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I like in like long duration space travel to, it's probably a bad analogy, but it's the only one I can really think of, is like you're a prisoner, but in the best prison ever available. You know what I mean? Because like that, you have a very small amount of room you have, relatively speaking. You can't really go outside unless like you have to. So like there's a lot of things like you're saying that you wouldn't be able to do it because of the whole being alone and how hard that can be on people. Do you think that'll change even more so the longer duration missions we get, like going out past Jupiter where it takes years and years type of deal?
Yeah, I think that hopefully they develop some kind of, what you see in the movies where they like are in this like sleep
Mhm.
machine thing, and then they just like wake up like it's yet tomorrow, like the next day, but it's really been like years and years. Hopefully that could be developed because um, I'm not sure. I mean, I know isolation in general is very bad for the mind.
Mhm.
So you don't want crazy people then being on Jupiter.
Especially in a pressurized tube that, pure oxygen environment, pretty much, that might be a bad day if you had someone go, space dementia or whatever you'd want to coin the term.
Right. But in general, like cryogenic sleep would be cool, even if you're not traveling to Jupiter. Maybe people could find out ways to use it here. Like if you're terminally ill
Hmm.
and you want to go into cryogenic sleep. I think that's what it's called. I'm just going to use that term. You guys know
Yeah,
what I'm
I believe that's the term. Yeah.
yeah. Um, if you wanted to opt into that and wait for a potential cure, something like that. So if they do develop like cryogenic sleep things for space, it could, just like with mostly a lot of things developed for space, we can use it here on Earth for everyday things.
It's interesting you bring that up because in the last episode, my guest, we were kind of going about the whole, his, he brought up the question of, we understand more about space than we do about our oceans. And he asked like my opinion on that subject. And, we haven't explored 75% of the oceans, but why should we explore space? It was kind of like his question to me, even though
Oh,
he believes in all of space, but he's just asking that. Um, and I think one thing kind of helps the other. So something like you're alluding to, something that we develop for long duration space travel might help with terminally ill people, where you know might be able to put them to sleep, but then be able to treat them while they're undergoing that, even if it takes years, type thing. So I think there's definitely goods to both sides.
yeah, I am also fascinated by the ocean, and I'm lucky enough to live by an ocean, and I love, one of my like hobbies is like going to the ocean at night.
Hmm.
it's peaceful at that time of day instead of like during the day when there's a bunch of people there. But spending that like peaceful time with the ocean and the stars, because you get to see the stars at night,
Mhm.
especially by the ocean where there's not a lot of light pollution, is a special thing that I hope that everyone gets to experience one day. Because you just sit there and think about like how much what's going on just like around you in general, and how many fish are out there and things like that, and what's and you're looking at history when you look at the night sky,
Mhm.
because of how long it takes light to travel. So thinking about that too, it's just a cool, peaceful experience. I don't know what your question was, but I just you mentioned the ocean and go off on that tangent.
No, it's okay. Oh, we're like you pretty much answered. I was just saying how I think there's goods to studying space because it bleeds over to other areas. So,
Yeah,
like that.
it does. It
Because
does.
like studying the climate, that was one thing we talked about, and you have a bunch of people who they're either on one side of the coin generally, or there's some people who just don't care one way or another. But like what we understand about our climate today is mostly because of satellites in space, mixed with ground station radars and other things like that. But our satellites have enabled us to predict weather patterns that were never possible before. So when people say, "Oh, we shouldn't care about space because of this," or "We shouldn't do as much in space because of this," I'm kind of like, well, millions of other people would be dead right now if we didn't have that.
I think it would be cool if there was, and there might be, if there's like a YouTube video or a website explaining everything that space technology and um, space in general has taught us, um, about our own world and how it's helped us in our own world. I think that would be a really cool video or website just to know more about um, how it's helped us in general.
Yeah, that would be amazing if they could kind of catalog every single thing that's been done since the Sputnik days of the first instrument in space to now. That would be an amazing thing.
Right. And even just like having the list of that, because those things that, like for example, knowing about the climate, it just leads off into all these different things that it just starts the conversation for all these different other things to be
Mhm.
made as well. So space is very important.
So speaking of conversations on other things, is and this is people I've probably heard a good thousand different viewpoints on this subject. Is there's something in psychology and in space called the Fermi paradox, where the idea behind there's intelligent alien life in the universe is the basis of this, and it basically stands for anybody who has never heard of it before. A very basic synopsis is that while there's no direct evidence for aliens, most people in the scientific community believe that based on the law of averages, there should be at least some. Do you have a thought on alien existence or what that even means? The like term aliens.
Yeah, so the Fermi paradox goes deeper. It goes very deep into explaining like the conditions that a planet needs to have in
Mm-hmm.
order for it to be conducive for life. And there's so many different conditions, and then they go into like the percentage of like it being like all those conditions being met
Mm-hmm.
somewhere out in the universe. Um, and I think it's interesting that I definitely think that aliens have existed at some point, or aliens, life on other planets have existed, whether it's at this point of time. I mean, I think so, because if I mean there's just like infinite amount of planet, like we can't explore
Hmm.
how um, how many planets and things that there are and galaxies. So there, I mean, I'm assuming that there's life out there living right at this very moment, which is also very cool to think about. Like, what is this other life form that we have no idea about doing at this moment? Or it, not alive at this moment, but in the future when we're not alive, or um, in the past when we haven't been alive, there probably has been. I'm sure we're not the anomaly here. Um, but it's very interesting to think about, like, why there hasn't been any like solid proof of aliens. Um, but so even if there were aliens, life on other planets, it would be very hard for them to reach us um, in general. It would just, the timing thing would have to be impeccable, because we as humans have finally evolved to a point where we're able to comprehend the existence of aliens,
Hmm.
and they would have to um, aliens would have to like have this crazy technology to even travel to us in this very point in time or something. It would just be very unlikely, I think.
Yeah, because there's I'm right there with you that I believe that we can't be the only thing, and then that's pretty ridiculous. I mean, as a person who studies science, and I had this conversation with a previous guest who was a scientist studying these things, is that you have to be open to the possibility that we are the only thing, but I don't think that's the case, based upon how many habitable worlds and things we've seen. But like you said, that the idea of them being at the same time in their evolution as us, or whether they're even humanoid, which I think is that's probably the biggest thing to me is when people think of aliens, they're like, oh, it's a person or it's a three-headed green monster with tentacle, like whatever you believe. I think that saying that they're humanoid is a very rare thing if it were to even happen. I think we're probably one of the few that might actually be humanoid because life is bacteria. Bacteria is life. So considering those, they're aliens in a sense. You know what I mean? So
I think, yeah, that brings me to the topic of if there's only possibility for life, um, is an Earth-like planet. I wonder, like, how, if evolutionarily speaking, like, if this is what it ends up to be
mhm.
on other planets too. Um, but who knows?
Yeah, because I mean, they
Yeah,
could be at the same level of evolution as us, but not have the resources to go to space.
right.
You
No,
know,
exactly. Yeah.
they could, or they could be at the same evolution or past, like way past us, because we're relatively young in the cosmos. That they could be nearing their stars in life cycle. For all we know. So I think it's an interesting kind of thought process to run down as to whether we're alone or not. And I don't know about you, like I'm not a religious person, but I believe that that's also one of the reasons why many belief systems are around, because that thought that we could be the only things in the entire universe, it's a pretty scary thing to think about when you get down to it.
Yes, I think that a lot of I don't mean to sound rude, but I think a lot of religious-based thinking is fear-based thinking, like the
Yeah.
fear of dying, the fear of like nothing being out there to help you, um, uh, and so um, I think that's why so many cultures have a religion, and it's a very common thing among humans, because there's so much we don't know, and that is scary. So coming up with these different philosophies on like how to think about the world is less scary than living it in a way where you think that you don't know what death is, and you
Mm.
don't know where your family goes when they die, and you don't know, there's so many things that we don't know. And I myself am comfortable with not knowing those things, and I accept unknowing,
Mhm.
and I believe I can change my future, um, instead of someone else, or hoping that it gets better or something. So I take power in myself, and I I love not knowing. And in the end, like no one knows. So
Yeah.
there's beauty in that. I mean, we don't have to know everything.
Yeah, like you said, that's I think I almost consider it an empowering thing, because if we knew everything, we would strive for nothing. But because we
Right.
don't know hardly anything, then we strive for everything. So I think that's kind of a I think that's a it's a good thing, I think, to think about life in a way that we're gonna die someday, and that's it. So we should therefore strive to get as much done as we should.
Right. And in unknowing, you pursue knowledge. Um, so that's exciting.
So like the multiverse theory, it could be that thought of, well, there's multiple infinite amount of Danielles, there's multiple infinite amount of Michaels in different planes. Like I might have black hair and be 4'2", and you might have blonde hair and be 7 feet tall. Like there's, what we think as aliens could maybe even be that, where it's just a different version of you on a different plane. So I I sometimes go down those thoughts of, string theory and multiverses and antimatter, anti-universes, and all this type of stuff, that it really kind of like opens your mind up.
Right. Yeah. So you're talking about this like theory of explaining quantum mechanics
Yep.
of just for like people who don't know, I guess, because not everyone knows
Yeah.
what those things are. I barely do, but I have listened to a couple of things about like quantum mechanics in general.
Mhm.
And so yeah, so the multiverse theory, I guess, is something that where whenever there's a I don't know, I don't want to explain it because I would probably mess it up, but like there could potentially be multiple versions of ourselves, which is a crazy thought. And that was another time where I was mind blown. So the time where I found out that SpaceX was trying to go to Mars,
Hmm.
and when I heard about the multiverse theory, which was pretty recently, I I think I read that book like maybe like a month or two ago. So I'm still not like completely on board. I don't think that's how I live my life, thinking
Hmm.
that thought where there's just like um, multiple different versions, like infinite amount of different versions of the world. Um, but I think it's definitely an interesting thought to think, and I think that more people should know about it. Like know that like scientists in our community, like that's the way some people think. Like
Yeah, especially
that's
like Sean Carroll, he's a big kind of into the whole like string theory multiverse. So yeah, I
right.
mean,
And
if
I mean people out there just don't know anything about that. And if you don't know anything about multiverse, I would highly recommend looking into it. Just even watching like a 5-minute YouTube video explaining like the very basic concept of it, um, because it is a like widely thought about theory. It's just
yeah, because I mean, if you look back at even Einstein's theories, which he has many for anyone who's never, you know, studied anything about Einstein, and one of them was the theory on gravitational waves, and it was 100 years ago. So basically, for anyone who has no idea what that means, it's like if two black holes were to collide, they would produce a ripple, basically like a wave in space, because that's the theory that space is kind of like able to be rippled and waved through through time because of gravity. So 100 years ago, he proposed this, and everybody thought he was nuts. 2 or 3 years ago, we find out this is 100% true. So, in 100 years from now, who knows? Like we might know everything there is to know about quantum mechanics. There's no telling.
right. Yeah, I didn't know that we had only found out that that was true. Like
Yeah,
I
I
guess
think I
a
think
couple years
the
ago.
I think the experiment had been happening for a long time, but
Mhm.
as far as like actually detecting them and then putting the results out was about 2 or 3 years ago.
Wow, that's so exciting. I wish there was a better way for more people to know more about these kinds of things. I think like when most people like watch the news, but the news doesn't really report about things like that, unfortunately.
And if it is, it's
Unless
like a
it's
small little draft on like the back, section of the news or something, so.
right, and unless it's like there's like some kind of like media spin on it. Like I remember one of the more recent things that was like kind of blew up was like a NASA intern like found a different planet or something on his like I don't know, I'm getting the
It
story
was
wrong,
on his
but like
first day.
on his
Yeah.
like first day or something. And I think that blew up, but like things like what you were saying, like theories that have been around for 100 years being proven or something like that, that doesn't have like the special media edge that would kind of thrive as opposed to like that NASA one. So I wish, I hope in the future that the media, there's like a way for more ideas to be more widely dispersed. Um,
Yeah, I think it's definitely important. I mean, I'm a super science space nerd, so of course I knew about it like the second they were posting about it. But I do wish that the general education system even would kind of focus more on when these things come about. I mean, it's important for a lot of different reasons if you really want to get down to it. But obviously the our education system in the US, for anyone who's watching this, maybe outside the US, is we're very focused on testing. We're not really necessarily focused on learning, if you want to say that. So,
yeah, and to me, a lot of things weren't interesting in high school because they didn't relate to my life at all.
mhm.
And I think it's good for teachers to like now when I'm learning things like I can relate it to my like even history. Like I think history is a common boring thing for people, but you can relate it to like um, how it impacts you today and all the different systems and things that happened and how we are today because of our history and um, just with space too, like bringing it down to like how space and science, like how it impacts you every day. It's just there's so many things, and bringing it to like that level of like this is why it's important to your everyday life is I think
Mhm.
essential for learning.
So I'd like to ask, since, like I said, you're the first female guest I've had on the show, you're gonna have to you have to represent all the women here.
Oh gosh.
um, but women have been instrumental in the scientific community since the very beginning. While, like, throughout history, unfortunately, there's been a lot of discoveries that have been made by women, but the credit has been taken by men just because, unfortunately, that's the way of the times. And, up till recently, what do you think as a woman, that for anyone who would want to be getting started in science or getting started in learning about space, like, do you have a thought on what someone should focus on at this day and age versus 5 years ago? Maybe, is there something that you think they should kind of focus on?
Like a topic
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
um that's an interesting question. I think um hmm whatever interests, I think you should start with like if you are interested in even learning anything about science, like you should start with what you're interested in. um I guess I'm not sure. Like for me, like I started off with being fascinated that like we were going to Mars and then it just like escalated
Mhm.
from there. But I think it takes like one of those moments in your life where you're like kind of like mind blown or you had no idea this is the way the world worked. And then you can start like delving into like that aspect of like uh how you can I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying, but yeah, for women, I don't know. That's a good question.
because there's like women in the past, like Marie Curie, who did heavily into like radioisotope science, and we understand a lot of the things we know about radioactivity today because of what she did and things. And there's been multiple women like Peggy, up at the space station. She spent, I think she actually broke Scott Kelly's record for consecutive time up in space while she was up there. I mean, and Christina, who was just up there, she almost spent a year. So there's been plenty of women in the STEM fields who, I mean, there's probably been things that they have done that men would have never accomplished. So I think it's interesting how even today a lot of people don't know some of these people's names when it comes to that.
Right. Yeah, that's so true. And it might be discouraging for women
Yeah.
just to get into that field. Um, I think it I think for me what interests me is like since I was not in that field to begin with, like through high school or college or things like that.
Hmm.
I think just like the everyday person, the everyday female who like was never really interested in that stuff, like delving into it now, I kind of feel like it's not, like I have felt like in the past where it's kind of just like too late for me to like
Hmm.
learn all of these things that now I'm interested in and like make an impact in the fields that I'm interested in now. So I think I would encourage all people in general
Hmm.
to like it's never too late to learn things and to like impact the field that you're interested in. So I learned about space and technology way later, but I think it's still worth doing and there's still so much to know and I kind of get discouraged by that sometimes, but um, there's so much information out there nowadays on the internet and there's so many amazing people who make YouTube videos explaining things, and you can really learn anything that you want to learn right now. So it's an exciting time, and yeah, and I respect all those women who went through that struggle without being acknowledged for it. I think there was that movie that the women of like NASA back in the day.
Hmm.
I still have yet to watch it, but oh, I think it's
Actually,
called Hidden Figures.
yeah,
Um,
I
but
actually
I think
watched it
it's
on
great
a
that
flight back
yeah, I think
from
that's
being
great that
overseas.
the
It was good.
media is like brings to light some of those accomplishments as well. Um,
Yeah, because I mean, even in I think I think the Russians might have been one of the first to actually put women in space, and I mean, obviously they were the first to put men in space as well. But I think even the U.S. was pretty far lacking in
I
in that
remember
aspect.
hearing that they were not sure how to deal with like women's menstrual cycles in space, and
Yeah,
they had like these crazy ideas about how it would just like they had really backwards ideas. I think I guess they just didn't know how space would affect women in general, and
yeah,
um, now I have to go back and like look into like what crazy things they thought they thought about women going to space.
yeah. There's, I'm sure, been all types of interesting theories regarding that, but obviously we found out a way to handle anything pretty much up there. So besides maybe, I think I've actually done studies on if like a woman were to get pregnant and things in space and how that would affect. I think they've actually started working on things like that as well. Because, I mean, speaking about space travel, that's something that's inevitable. Is you put people on a space, ship together for years at a time, somebody's gonna end up having a kid somewhere. So
Yeah, I did not think about someone being pregnant in space ever. That's the first time that crossed my mind.
yeah, I think they've done.
Interesting.
I think they've done studies about how it may affect. And I don't know enough about it to speak on it really, but um, that's another interesting topic. Too to for anyone to you want to spend some hours of your day look into that. But so you're in marketing. Um, many companies nowadays do, there's a few that stand above the others in terms of like marketing their rockets brand per se. Um, do you think in the future, since private industry seems to be kind of leading the way to space, getting people to want to go to Mars, do you, like I'm assuming that marketing will probably play a heavy thing because it's like movies like Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger back in the day. They had all these, VR experience things that they would sell to get, one of them was these Mars things, which the movie was kind of based on. Um, I feel like the field of marketing will probably play a heavy role in even getting people to want to leave the Earth for like.
Definitely. It's definitely communicating failures as well,
Mhm,
is very important, um, because like we've seen SpaceX failures. I mean, we've seen other failures as well, and
mhm.
like communicating those, um, in a way that, um, makes people still want to go out there and explore is exciting. But um, yeah, I don't know. I don't have anything to say.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I honestly don't believe that the majority of the people probably will want to go. I mean, it's going to be astronomically expensive. It's the first, even at the best, like $200,000 a person. That's not something in the realm that probably most people can afford.
Oh,
But
so you think it'll cost money for people to go to Mars, or do you think that building, like they would be working, like they would be? I think Elon was saying that like people would be working a lot, building a base and things at first.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I think that it'll probably be set up in a way that it costs X amount, but if you go and you work for X amount, it'll basically pay that, that fee per se. So it'll be an upfront cost to the company, but then like in the back end, they basically make it up. Um, so I think it'll probably be that type of structure as well.
oh, interesting. Yeah, I never really thought about it costing money to go up there,
Yeah,
especially since it's like going to be pretty harsh conditions and things like that.
yeah, and
Um,
majority of people will probably die. To be honest, I mean that's just what'll probably happen.
right. But you said that would you be interested in going to Mars?
Oh yeah, I'd go 100%.
Okay, so we need people like you. I guess marketing to people who marketing to that kind of crowd of people
Yeah,
instead of just like everyone.
because I've asked a few people and they said they would go if it was already established. Like you could go there, you can, you know, eat at a restaurant, you could do whatever, which I don't know if that'll ever be like a thing. It could be, who
Like
knows?
Mars, the amusement park.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's just like take a trip to Mars.
I mean,
It's right there.
I hope one day the moon will kind of be like that, but in a history setting, like you could go to the Apollo landing site and see
That's
the,
that's in an episode of Futurama.
yeah. Because I just read which I don't know how I never looked at it. I read a report saying that the boot prints from Apollo 11 will be there for about 100 million years, they estimate. So, like people for the considerable future should be able to go and see Neil's first footprints on the moon, which would be like a crazy thing to think about. You could just go there to see that, but it might be like the
That would be so
Smithsonian on the
cool.
moon type thing.
Yeah, that would be cool if there was like a whole base on the moon. I guess it would the moon would look different at night if there was like a whole type of city on the moon. it,
Yeah,
you
it
would
for sure
see
would.
it from here on Earth, which would be a funny thing to think about.
Yeah, it would. And I'm sure we're going to get there. It'll probably just take a little bit of time, but I don't see that as not happening with the way we're going.
That's a really interesting concept. Yeah. I The future is so interesting with all the possibilities that it could have. So I hope we go down that future where the moon, but I wonder like who would be able to afford it or like what the economy would be. But
Yeah, that's something for way above me to figure that out. But
right.
Do you have
I think
any?
everything has to do with money, though. So I think that that if we wanted that to happen, it would definitely have to be based around money, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's just the way the world, you know.
I just off the top of my head, since you're a parent, how do
Mhm.
you educate your kids about space? I know you said you took them to watch launches and things like that, but is there anything that you do at home, or do they are some of them like not interested and like you try and like veer them to be interested, or just like what's it like to be a parent teaching about space?
So I think at this point, because I've always been so interested, things like that, like that your parents like, not everything obviously, but certain things kind of bleed off automatically that they want to kind of emulate that, so they're interested. But I've also tried to do a lot of like science experiments with them. I've had them watch, videos on YouTube about science, like the Backyard Scientist. He's a great guy who does a lot of science videos. He lives here in Florida as well. He does all these crazy things with like melting aluminum and pouring it on a aquarium and seeing what happens and all those different types of stuff. So I've kind of done that route where I've been interested in it and I've had them around it. So then they've got interested in it. And then we kind of try and do stuff together to further that aspect.
Oh, that's awesome. And they seem interested in everything that you show them.
Yeah, my daughter wants to be a scientist. She just doesn't know exactly what type yet, but she's 10, so she's got plenty
Yeah.
of time. And
Hmm.
my son wants to be a pilot, so
Oh, wow. And how old is he?
he's 7.
Oh.
So that's and the youngest is 4, so he doesn't care about anything except for dinosaurs. But
Yeah, that's history, science, I guess,
yeah, I was the
evolution.
same way when I was his age, so it's all good in that aspect. But yeah, I mean, you want them to grow up with their own, wants and wills, but at the same time, you want to steer them to that direction that you think will be most beneficial to them in the future. So that's kind of what I would try to do, is not necessarily say like you should be doing this, but if you'd like to have a future where you don't really have to struggle necessarily if you get good in that field, like once you get really good, you can get a good paying job, and financially speaking, you might not have to worry as much as, you know, if you went to work at McDonald's or something, obviously, as like, making minimum wage type deal. So
Well, I think even working at McDonald's is potentially not in the cards for the future as
yeah,
technology becomes more of the financial way to go as well as like the practical way to go.
yeah.
Um, uh, so have, going on to like the technology side of that, have you introduced your kids to like technology at all? Because I think technology and science obviously like go kind of like hand in hand, especially
Yeah,
when it comes.
they've been pretty heavy into it. Actually, I've got them books, and they're starting to learn how to do coding, here soon, hopefully. They've just been kind of reading about like the how you kind of implement it. Um, they have tablets where they've done certain things on to learn how to operate the actual system of it. So yeah, I've had them pretty heavily into. They've been able to operate computers and things much younger than even I was at the time. And at the time I grew up, computers were just beginning to really be a thing in schools that they were putting in. So I went through like typing classes and all the other things that they don't even do nowadays, pretty much. So
Mhm. Cool. And then I guess since you were like you were in the military, is
yeah.
that what you're saying?
Mhm.
Okay. How what do you think about a space force? And that's like a combination of like military and space.
Yeah, so the Air Force has been the domain for, you know, and it's kind of a misnomer because the Air Force, everyone believes that the Air Force has all the planes, and that's actually not. I was in the Navy, and the Navy has like 70% of the military's aircraft. So the Air Force generally focuses on like heavy bombers, and refueling aircraft, and then the other aspect is space. So but I kind of feel that the Space Force, in my opinion, and only my opinion, I think it's kind of a good thing because I think you should have a domain for each area. So the Army has, the ground. That's pretty much that's their primary focus besides the Marines. The Navy has the sea and most of the air. Um, Air Force has their aspect. So I think that it should be its own thing. That way it can have its own budget, it can have its own goals, and they don't have to kind of intertwine with, oh, maybe we should do this because of this, but yeah, we'll kind of put that one to the side. It doesn't really matter. You know, if it's his own thing, it wouldn't have to worry about any of that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And then a question, just because I love thinking about this, and it's like one of my favorite things to think about,
Mm-hmm.
is free will in general. Do you believe in free will, or have you thought about free will at all, or if like we live in a deterministic universe, or if we like are able to? I mean, there's a totally a variety of
Mm-hmm.
levels of free will, but I guess what are your thoughts on a free will?
Yeah, I've thought some about it, and getting my like degree in after the military. After I got out, I got my degree, my bachelor's degree. I had to do some like classes and you know religion and some other things as part of just what you have to do to get your degree. And we had some interesting debates in the class I was in um, on creationism and free will and deterministic universe and things like that. And I'm of the opinion that each person is independent and you make your own way in life. You know, like you have nature versus nurture, you have your environment you grew up in, you have your morals kind of guided by your parents or parent, whoever you have. But I think you make your own way in life, if you want to call it that. I don't think necessarily anything is pointing you in any direction. I think you kind of just you're going along that path and you kind of just see how it goes and you just keep going. You know what I mean? I don't think there's one thing that's kind of pointing you one way or another, in my personal opinion.
Right. So you're saying that so like we're born with a certain set of like um, biological features, like our brain chemistry is we're born a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're also influenced by our nature, which is like the environment around us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, but you're saying that we can, on top of those things that like we don't have any free will over. So there's like obviously we have everyone knows that we have like at least limited free will. Like we're
Yeah.
not. I didn't choose to have brown eyes.
Yeah.
Um, and I didn't choose my brain chemistry or my environment growing up, at least. So in that way, at least we're limited in our free will,
Yeah.
and we can't go like certain routes. But you're saying that you believe that we're still like making our own choices, even based off of those things.
Yeah. Because you have what you're born with, and no one can fight their own DNA. That's impossible. You know, you're not going to win that fight against your own biology. But past that, past those little things that you can't control, your height, your skin color, you know, your hair color naturally, any of those types of things. I think past that, it's on the individual person to make up their own decisions. And I personally think that saying that
But aren't our decisions based off of our history and our brain chemistry and our environment?
I think the way you interpret what decision to make is done by your chemistry, your brain chemistry, and your history. Um, but I think that make deciding what the right decision should be is on the person. You view it through a specific lens as to your entire family's history and the way your brain interprets data, but making the determination of what decision you should make is on the person, I believe.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe that's like what consciousness is instead of like the animal maybe type of thought of like only having like your brain chemistry of being that animal and the your environment.
Mm-hmm.
I think they just base animals maybe just base stuff off of that in particular, but maybe we as humans we are able to see things in a different way, whereas we can make a choice that's different.
Yeah,
um
I think that most I'm just the type of person where I don't believe that something has one hand on the wheel and I mean, it has two hands on the wheel. I think that we have one hand and our biology has the other hand, and they're kind of just wrestling each other for control of your daily existence. Because animals only know a few things. They know I got to eat. At some point, I have to procreate in order to further the species, and then I have to take shelter and things like that to survive and evade predators. That's really most animals. That's all they think about, and to an extent, that's all humans think about. But we just evolved past most of those types of thought process.
Right. Talking about animals, I think it's interesting to think about like, you know how like animals have a certain like like my cats, for example, can never comprehend me talking to you right now and
Mm-hmm.
through this technology and things like that. I like to think sometimes that like us as humans are also similarly like unable to understand some things in the universe. Do you think that that's true, or do you think that humans have the ability to understand everything, we just haven't learned it yet? So in the way that like cats
Yeah.
can't understand what I'm doing, can we like never understand what something else in the universe is doing?
No, I think that we we will have the ability to understand anything and everything at some point. Um, but how long it'll take us to get there, I don't know the answer to that question. Probably a very long time, because I think humans have been around for about 200,000 years. So maybe another 200,000 years, we might be at that level.
Oh,
But
you're saying that like humans are still evolving to like become smarter and like comprehend more things about the
yeah,
universe?
yeah, I think that because I mean, if you really think about it, every person having a kid is evolving from one, family of the species to another, right? Every time, every day, your cells are evolving. Unfortunately for us, it's every day we get older and our cells die a little bit. But I think that's if you think of it in that way, in about 200,000 years, we might be at the point where we understand everything, and our ability for adaptation, I think, is what has made us where we are today. If we didn't have the ability to adapt and overcome, then we'd be still, apes on the grass plains coming down from the trees and things. So,
I think as with adapting, I think that a part of um, going to Mars is our like our intelligence of being able to go to Mars is going to keep us alive in that like a good adaptation
mhm.
in like that sense too, because we are potentially saving ourselves in the future for when planet Earth becomes inhabitable. Um, so it's a cool adaptation that we have as opposed like we're
Yeah,
going to a different planet, whereas like another animal might, I don't know, change colors or something.
yeah. We luckily we've inherited those things from a lot of those aspects, but I mean, yeah, like you said, it's a and I think fear is the most important of those because we have a fear of being extinct, so that presses us to further on.
Yeah, I see that fear, but I also see a a thought of only the now. So like a lot of times we do things like based off of like, well, it's not harming me right now, but it will harm future generations and
Hmm.
people like not caring about that. So I think that there's like two sides, like two people, like one who's just like, I know that polluting is bad, but I'm still gonna have like five trucks and the future generations can deal with it. But like people like Elon who are like very future minded and very much like wanting the future to be a good one. So he makes decisions based off of that.
Hmm.
Um, so some people I think aren't scared. I think they're just like, it's not
Yeah,
going to affect me in my life. So
yeah. Some people just accept there's things that we need to do for the future, and that's not a bad thing. We should all be hopefully like that, but we aren't, sadly.
yeah. One other thing I think is interesting about space and just us in general is that like we're all made of stuff from space. Like we're
Hmm.
all made out of like a certain amount of things. And so that makes us all connected. And we're like nothing would be possible without like the sun. So like we're all like part of the sun, and like the sun
Hmm.
wouldn't be possible without space in general, um, and how it was made. The sun was made. So I think it's interesting to think about that. Do you have any thoughts about like how we're all connected and like how everything influences everything, and we're all like just one big.
As Neil deGrasse Tyson likes to say, we're all made of star stuff, right? So because
Mhm.
our little atoms are physically came from stars exploding and in the Big Bang, and that's how we are what we are. So yeah, I think it's important to think of ourselves in the terms of a universal scale and not necessarily um, a family or a neighborhood or a country. While we all like, I was in the military, I'm very patriotic, I'm all about, US and supporting what we do. At the same time, we should all be working together towards a common goal of survival, because in reality that's all it really boils down to, right? So when you study things like space and, you know the broader sciences, I think it opens you up to that stop thinking individually and start thinking in a team effort, which, I mean, even the military brought you down. That's the main goal of boot camp: break you down individually, build you up as a team. So that bleeds into many other aspects.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that if everyone had the thought of just like we're all connected in that way,
Hmm.
um, it would it might like change people's points of view, or maybe like make them a little bit nicer to
Yeah.
just in their everyday lives, like maybe like less honking or less um being mean to your waiter, or you know just everyone's connected. And um I think science and space kind of like is a good way of looking at that.
Yeah. I think they go hand in hand in regards to that.
Hmm.
Well, I'd like to thank you for being on this episode of the podcast, and like thank you for taking your time out of your evening, even though I know you guys are in lockdown right now, which we probably will be soon. So
I
here
have
in
all the
Florida,
time.
do you
No, I'd
have
like
any?
to
Do you
thank
have
you.
any?
I
Do you have any closing remarks? Anything we should be looking forward to from you, like in your marketing stuff, anything like that?
Oh, no, I just want to thank you for having me and for having this podcast and having meaningful conversations with people about um, space. I think that's super important and super cool. And I look forward to like looking at more of your podcasts and more of your guests. And I'll encourage people to, maybe some more women to, to join.
Oh,
I
that
could
would
talk
be good.
about like things like this all the time. So I thank you for being an outlet. I know that sometimes like some of my friends, they might want to talk about something different,
Mhm.
like shows or things like that, but I love talking about this kind of thing. So so thank you.
No, no problem. And maybe one day you could be a guest on here again. It'd be a pleasure to have you on the show again.
Cool. Well, thank you so much.
Hope you have a good evening.
You too.